What you're about to see almost never happens on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. An European martial arts champion, fast, confident, and filming for his followers, stepped over the barrier and kicked a royal guard square in the jaw. Why did the guard, standing completely still, why he didn't react, not even once, until the last moment? The stakes? One wrong move, and he could have broken decades of royal protocol, or worse. Watch closely. The champion bounces in for another strike, and the guard finally takes a single step forward. Now, before we reveal the full story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel Guard Focus and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The kind of morning that makes London feel older than it is had settled over Buckingham Palace. A crisp autumn bite in the air, enough to make breath curl into pale clouds, but softened by the low gold of a rising sun. The gates caught that light, like they'd been dipped in bronze, their intricate crests gleaming against the deep black of the wrought iron. Beyond them, the forecourt was already filling. Tourists clustered 3 deep along the rope barriers, lenses glinting, voices a patchwork of accents and excitement. Some whispered reverently, as if the palace itself could hear them. Others laughed too loudly, chasing the perfect selfie with the soldiers in red. And in the middle of it all, standing as if carved from the very stone beneath his boots, was Guardsman Daniel Carrick. 6'3", shoulders squared as though the weight of the tall black bearskin hat was nothing at all. Carrick's scarlet tunic caught the morning light in sharp planes and edges. The white leather belt cut clean across his torso, buttons gleaming in precise alignment. His gloves, pressed and polished, hung still at his sides, no tremor, no twitch. Even his eyes, shaded beneath the brim of that iconic headpiece, betrayed nothing. To the crowd, he might have looked like any other sentry, another piece of the centuries-old pageantry. But the men in his regiment knew better. Daniel Carrick had been a paratrooper before he ever donned the red. 2 tours in Helmand Province, scars hidden beneath the fabric, and the kind of measured composure only forged under live fire. He'd transferred to ceremonial duty after an injury to his left knee. Made parachute work impossible, though you'd never guess it from the way he moved. Among his peers, his reputation was ironclad, unflappable, untouchable, immune to the bait that had caught out younger guards. Across the forecourt, Sergeant Hale kept a watchful eye, hands clasped neatly behind his back. Hale had been in long enough to read a man's posture like a book, and Carrick's was telling him exactly what he expected: calm, steady, entirely present. The ceremonial changeover had begun its silent choreography. Boots struck gravel in perfect rhythm, the crisp crunch carrying in the cold air. Commands were murmured low enough for only the soldiers to hear, movements so sharp they seemed mechanical. It was, to anyone who'd seen it before, exactly as it should be. The crowd shifted in pockets, children lifted onto shoulders, phones tilting to capture the moment. The distant chime of Big Ben rolled faintly over the rooftops. It was, in short, an ordinary watch. But even in the midst of that calm, something was about to change. It started as a ripple, a movement near the west side of the barrier, tourists leaning aside, murmurs passing from one person to another, the faint hum of anticipation replacing idle chatter. Hale's eyes flicked toward the disturbance, reading it before it reached the centre. Carrick hadn't moved, but behind the shade of his bare skin, he had noticed too. The sound of boots on gravel, the smell of the cold, all pushed momentarily aside as another presence began to cut through the atmosphere of order. The air in the forecourt seemed to hold its breath. Discipline and tradition might have felt unshakable a moment ago, but something new was stepping into their orbit. The first thing most people noticed about him wasn't his height, though at 6 feet he was built like a coiled spring, but the way he moved. Even pushing through the crowd, he carried himself with the loose, easy balance of someone who knew exactly how his body worked. A black training jacket with bold sponsor logos clung to his frame, and every step was measured for effect. Liam Rourke. Late 20s, a name that meant something in certain circles. European martial arts champion, multiple disciplines. Online clips of him sparring, kicking heavy bags until the chains rattled, smiling at the camera with that same wolfish grin he was wearing now. He had 2 men with him, one holding up a phone in vertical format, already streaming to an audience somewhere far from the palace forecourt. The other stayed just behind, laughing at every muttered comment Liam threw over his shoulder. "Right, here they are," Liam announced, his voice cutting through the cold morning air. "The famous Buckingham Palace statues." A few tourists chuckled nervously. Others shifted away, sensing the wrong kind of energy. The man behind the phone adjusted his angle to catch both Liam and Carrick in frame, his commentary running like a cheap sports broadcast. "Let's see if they're really as tough as they look. Spoiler alert, they're not." Liam shouldered his way to the rope barrier, ignoring the muttered complaints of the people he displaced. He stood barely 2 meters from Carrick, his head tilting as if assessing a potential opponent. "Not even blinking," he said loudly. "Bet you're not allowed to scratch your nose without permission, eh?" No response. "Come on, mate, you've got the uniform, the hat, the whole thing. Show us what you can actually do." The cameraman snorted. "He's just standing there. We came all this way for that?" A woman nearby, clutching a guidebook, shook her head. "Leave him alone. They're not here for your entertainment." Liam didn't even glance her way. He took 2 quick steps sideways and began shadow boxing toward the barrier, his punches snapping through the air, his feet light and fast. He threw in a spinning kick, pulling it just short of the rope, then grinned at the camera. "See? Fast, strong, controlled. I could tag him before he even knew what happened." A few in the crowd laughed, but it was an uneasy kind of sound. Parents pulled their children back a step. Phones began to rise, not for the palace architecture, but for the brewing confrontation. Carrick's eyes stayed forward, the line of his jaw unmoving under the bearskin's shadow. Inside, he registered the man's stance, balanced, sure-footed, the weight shifting in ways that spoke of real training. This wasn't just a drunken tourist larking about. This was someone who knew exactly how to generate power and probably thought that made him dangerous. Across the gravel, Sergeant Hale's head turned slightly. He didn't move in. Not yet. This wasn't the first time someone had tested a guard. He trusted Carrick to measure the moment, to keep within the rules until, if those rules no longer applied. Liam was talking again, loud enough to carry. "You lot realise these guys aren't real soldiers, yeah? Just ceremonial, just for show." It was bait for the crowd, as much as for the man in red, and already more heads were turning. The morning calm had gone. Something else was taking its place. Liam adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, glanced at the phone filming him, and smirked. "All right then, let's make this interesting." He stepped close to the rope barrier and began throwing short, sharp kicks into the empty space between them, stopping just shy of contact, the toes of his trainers hanging in the air for a fraction of a second before snapping back. The sound of his soles cutting through the cold air made a few people flinch. "Fast, yeah?" he said, addressing no one in particular, but making sure his voice carried. "And he doesn't even blink. I've seen shop mannequins with more life." The cameraman chuckled. "Bet you could have him on the floor in 5 seconds. 5! Try 3! Liam turned his attention back to Carrick, leaning forward slightly, as if inspecting him for weaknesses. He clapped twice, the sharp sound echoing off the stone walls. Nothing. He moved to Carrick's other side and clapped again, louder, right in line with the guard's face. Still nothing. Carrick's breathing stayed slow, measured. He scanned the man's movements without moving his eyes, cataloguing stance width, weight distribution, the flex in the lead knee that told. The smirk widened. "Not even a twitch. Come on, mate, you're making it too easy." From somewhere behind the rope, a small voice spoke up. "Dad, can he fight back?" The father hesitated. "Only if someone tries to hurt him. They're not allowed to move otherwise." Liam seemed to hear that, because his next move was deliberate. He began circling, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, like a fighter warming up. His friends egged him on, narrating every movement into the phone. "He's staying calm, folks. Look at that discipline. But how long do you reckon it lasts?" The crowd was shifting now, drawn by the unspoken promise of something happening. Phones rose higher. A group of tourists from Italy spoke in hushed tones, one of them shaking her head as if to say, "This isn't going to end well." Carrick's breathing stayed slow, measured. He scanned the man's movements without moving his eyes, cataloguing stance width, weight distribution, the flex in the lead knee that told him Liam's kicks could switch levels in an instant. This wasn't about skill, it was about intent, and Carrick knew exactly when intent crossed the line from play to threat. Liam moved in again, closing the gap until he was just over an arm's length from the rope. He snapped his fingers twice, then tilted his head. Nice coat, mate. Shame it's wasted on just standing still. He threw a slow-motion jab toward the guard's chest, stopping just short, pulling it back theatrically for the crowd. A ripple of uneasy laughter followed, but it was thinner now, more brittle. From across the forecourt, Sergeant Hale's posture had shifted, still at parade rest, but with a readiness in the shoulders that said he was already weighing his approach. Liam, either not noticing or not caring, began a sequence of low kicks, his heel striking the gravel just short of the rope. He spoke between each one, almost chanting, still not moving. A woman in the crowd muttered, "This is going to turn bad." And she was right. It happened so quickly that most people didn't register the shift until it was already in motion. Liam glanced back at the phone, filming him, winked, and said loud enough for the whole forecourt to hear, "Let's give them what they came for." He took 2 light steps back from the rope, bouncing on his toes as if preparing for a demonstration. "Just a photo," he called toward Carrick, holding up a palm in mock reassurance. Then he moved. With a sudden burst of speed, Liam vaulted the rope in a single fluid motion, landing on the gravel inside the restricted zone. Gasps tore through the crowd. Several voices shouted at once, "Oi!" and "Get back!" and "You can't be there!" But he was already closing the distance. Carrick didn't flinch. His boots stayed planted, eyes still fixed forward, the ceremonial rifle unmoved at his side. Inside, his focus tightened to a pinprick, every movement of the intruder catalogued in real time. Liam slowed his approach as if making a show of harmlessness, then pivoted into a low feint, his right foot swinging out and back. It was meant to look like a joke, until it wasn't. The second motion came fast and real, a sharp upward strike, with the instep aimed high. The edge of Liam's trainer clipped Carrick's jaw, snapping his head back a fraction. Hale was closing in fast, but Liam wasn't finished. He turned back to Carrick, lowering into a loose fighting stance, his hands rising chest high. "Come on then! Show us!" he taunted, the grin widening. "Let's see what the Queen's Guard can actually do." The forecourt had gone nearly silent now, the weight of the moment pressing down on every onlooker. They all sensed it. The line had been crossed. And for the first time all morning, the man in scarlet was about to move. The crowd held its breath. The sound of the contact was small, just a dull thud against skin, but the reaction it caused was anything but. A woman screamed. A child began to cry. Phones jerked, their recordings catching the moment in shaky frames. Across the forecourt, Sergeant Hale was already moving, his polished boots hammering the gravel. Security staff along the edge turned sharply toward the disturbance, their radios crackling to life. Carrick's head returned to its perfect alignment. The blow had been real, but his composure was unbroken. When he spoke, it was in a voice so sharp and commanding that it cut through the chaos like a blade. "Step back behind the barrier." The sudden authority in his tone froze several people where they stood, but not Liam. The martial artist grinned, turning toward the crowd with arms spread wide, as if inviting applause. "You saw that, right? Didn't even touch him. Oh wait, I did." His friends laughed from behind the rope, the phone still rolling, capturing every angle. Carrick didn't move. He didn't raise his weapon or alter his stance. But behind the steady gaze, something shifted, a decision forming, precise and inevitable. Liam's stance shifted, his lead foot inching forward, weight balanced for speed. His eyes were bright, not with malice, but with the cocky certainty of a man who had always dictated the pace of a fight. His friends, just beyond the rope, were eating it up, narrating for the phone like this was all still a game. Then Daniel Carrick moved, and one step, that was all. A single measured pace forward on the gravel. Deliberate enough for everyone to see it, controlled enough to leave no doubt that it was intentional. The effect on the forecourt was electric. A ripple of gasps passed through the tourists. Even Liam's grin faltered for half a second, as if the reality of a royal guard breaking position had finally landed. Carrick's rifle remained at his side, but the change in his posture was unmistakable. The weight shifted to the balls of his feet, shoulders subtly squared, chin tucked just enough to signal readiness. He said nothing. The silence itself was a warning. Liam took that half-second hesitation and tried to reclaim it. He bounced once on his toes, hands up in mock sparring guard. "All right then, let's..." He never finished the sentence. Carrick's left hand came up, palm open, parrying the probing jab Liam had started to throw. In the same movement, his right foot stepped deep across Liam's stance, sweeping behind the martial artist's lead leg. The shift of weight was brutal in its efficiency. No wasted motion, no flourish. Liam's balance broke instantly. Before he could recover, Carrick's right arm had threaded under his, locking the elbow and levering the shoulder downward. Liam's body followed the force, his trainers scraping against the gravel as he was turned and guided, not slammed, toward the ground. His knee buckled, momentum carrying him down. It was over in less than 3 seconds. Liam found himself face down, one arm pinned behind his back, in a restraint hold that left no room for movement without pain. Carrick's knee rested just enough weight against the back of his thigh to keep him still, his grip precise and unmoving. No shouting, no spectacle, just pure, functional control. The forecourt erupted, not in cheers but in sharp intakes of breath, murmurs of shock, the flutter of camera shutters firing at full speed. People craned over each other to see, their phones trembling in their hands. Sergeant Hale reached them a heartbeat later, his voice low but firm. "On your feet, now!" Carrick eased the pressure, guiding Liam upright with the same unyielding grip. The martial artist's earlier bravado was gone, replaced with a stiff-jawed attempt not to wince. His friends had gone quiet behind the rope, the phone still pointed at the scene, but without commentary now. Hale stepped in, taking control of Liam's arm, and moving him toward the nearest security point. "Nice work," he murmured to Carrick as they passed. "Clean, controlled, and by the book." Carrick said nothing, returning to his post without a glance at the cameras. His boots found their exact placement on the gravel, shoulders straight, eyes forward once more. The man in red was still again, but nobody in that crowd would ever look at him the same way. Liam Rourke was no longer the centre of his own show. With Sergeant Hale's hand clamped firmly on his arm, he was marched across the gravel toward a side gate where 2 members of palace security were already waiting. Their posture was calm, their movements efficient. No wrestling, no shouting, just the quiet certainty of people who did this for a living. Liam twisted once, trying to address the crowd as they passed. "It was just a joke. You all saw—" The rest was cut short as one of the security officers stepped in and guided him out of sight. His friends hesitated at the rope line, exchanging glances that betrayed an unspoken understanding. The footage they'd just captured wasn't going to make them look the way they'd planned. For a moment, the forecourt was strangely still. The clatter of boots from the ceremonial rotation had paused. Even the tourist chatter had faded into low murmurs. The only sound was the faint crackle of radios from the security team. Carrick stood exactly where he had returned to position, rifle steady, eyes forward, posture flawless. If not for the faint scuff marks on the gravel in front of him, you could almost believe nothing had happened at all. But the crowd knew better. Phones that had been raised in anticipation of some viral clip were slowly lowered. Some tourists slipped them back into their pockets entirely. A father leaned down to his son, the same boy who had asked earlier if the guards could fight back, and spoke quietly. "That's why you don't mess with them." The boy's gaze didn't waver from Carrick. Then, with a sudden seriousness, he stepped closer to the rope and raised his small hand in a salute. It was clumsy, the angle wrong, the fingers uneven, but it carried a sincerity that didn't need correcting. Carrick didn't move for several heartbeats. Then, almost imperceptibly, his head dipped by a fraction, an acknowledgement so subtle it might have been imagined. But the boy saw it, and his grin was instant. Further along the barrier, a woman in a wool coat shook her head in quiet amazement. "He didn't even lose his temper," she said to her companion. "Not once. Just waited, and then it was over." Sergeant Hale returned a few minutes later, his own stance easing only once he was back in Carrick's peripheral vision. Without turning his head, he murmured, All handled. No fuss. Just the way I like it. Carrick gave the faintest reply, just above a whisper. Yes, Sergeant. The ceremony resumed as if nothing had interrupted it. Boots struck gravel again in perfect rhythm, commands low and crisp. But for those who had witnessed it, the day's memory had already shifted, away from the postcard-perfect changing of the guard, and toward the quiet, clinical efficiency of one man doing exactly what needed to be done, exactly when it had to be done. The discipline was the same. The respect was new. The shift ended just after midday. The march back from the forecourt was as precise as ever. Boots aligned, rifles at the same angle, every step measured against centuries of tradition. Whatever had happened in the open air of Buckingham Palace was left outside its gates. Inside the barracks, the world narrowed to the routine of post-duty. Carrick stepped into the changing room, the familiar scent of oiled leather and pressed wool hanging in the air. He removed the bearskin hat first, setting it carefully on the wooden peg above his locker. The cool air on his head felt sharper now, the faint ache along his jaw, a quiet reminder of the morning's contact. He unfastened the white gloves and folded them neatly on the bench. The red tunic came next, unbuttoned with slow, practiced motions, the same speed he'd use whether the day had been uneventful or not. Routine was its own kind of armour. From the row behind him, Sergeant Hale's voice carried easily. Most wouldn't have waited that long. Carrick glanced over his shoulder. Hale was hanging his own kit with the same deliberate care, his expression neutral, but his eyes direct. Discipline, Carrick replied simply. Hale raised an eyebrow. Discipline's one thing. Letting a bloke kick you in the jaw before you act? That's something else. Carrick turned back to his locker, placing his tunic on the hanger. Discipline isn't about what you can do. It's about what you choose not to do until you must. There was a short pause, the kind that comes when words hit their mark. Hale leaned against the bench, arms folded. That kind of control's rare. It's what kept your men alive back in the Paras, isn't it? Carrick didn't answer right away. He closed the locker door with a soft click, then met Hale's gaze. You learn quick out there. Overreact and you make mistakes. Make mistakes and people don't come home? Hale nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. Well, it worked today. No mess, no excess. Just enough to end it. Neither man smiled, but there was a shared understanding in the silence that followed. The unspoken knowledge that real strength wasn't measured by how fast you could strike, but by how long you could stand still before you did. Hale pushed off the bench and headed for the door. Get that jaw checked. And Carrick? Sergeant! Good work. Carrick gave a small nod. Thank you. When the door swung shut behind Hale, the room was quiet again. Carrick sat for a moment longer, the distant hum of the city filtering through the old brick walls. Outside, the forecourt would already be filled with new tourists, snapping photos of the next rotation of guards. They'd see the scarlet tunics, the bearskins, the stillness, and most would never know what had happened there just hours before. Carrick reached for his gloves, folding them once more before slipping them into his locker. Discipline restored, duty ready for the next watch. If you saw someone cross the line with a royal guard like this, would you speak up or stay silent? And do you think the guard was right to wait until the very last moment to act? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe, and press the bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads. Share this video with someone who still thinks royal guards just stand still. They might see things differently. Watch our other royal guard stories on screen now, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new one.